What if I told you that a single accidental voice memo could unravel decades of carefully constructed lies, shatter a family, and ignite a firestorm of vengeance that consumed every fiber of my being? My name is Evelyn Hayes, and I thought I knew my brother David. We grew up in a quiet suburban home in upstate New York, sharing secrets, dreams, and the occasional squabble over the last piece of cherry pie. I believed our bond was unbreakable, forged in the fires of childhood and strengthened by the unspoken understanding only siblings share. I was wrong, horribly, tragically wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a day like any other, or so I thought. The sun streamed through my kitchen window, warming the ceramic tiles as I scrolled through my phone. A notification popped up, a new voice memo from David. He sent them often, quick updates about his day, his kids, his latest golf game. I clicked play, expecting to hear his usual cheerful banter, perhaps a complaint about traffic on the I-95. Instead, a cold, calculating voice filled my kitchen, a voice that was undeniably David's, but twisted with a venom I'd never heard. "She's so gullible, Mark," he chuckled, a sound that now chills me to the bone. "Honestly, I don't know how she hasn't figured it out yet. All these years, playing the doting sister, the supportive one, it's almost too easy." My breath hitched. Who was she? And what was it that I hadn't figured out? A tremor ran through me, a primal alarm bell ringing in the deepest parts of my soul. I leaned closer to the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs, each beat echoing the growing dread in my chest. The next words he spoke were like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "She still thinks I'm helping her out, lending her money for that stupid bakery of hers," David continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "The truth is, those loans are just my way of keeping her on a short leash. She's too busy trying to pay me back to ever look too closely at the books. Her little dream? It's been my cash cow for years, Mark. Years." The world spun. My bakery, Evelyn's Sweet Delights, the one I poured my heart and soul into, the one David had supposedly invested in, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, was a lie. A cruel, elaborate charade designed to bleed me dry. My brother, my own flesh and blood, had been systematically robbing me blind. The resentment I felt in that moment was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. Every late night, every aching back, every penny I'd scrimped and saved to repay him, it had all been for nothing. Worse than nothing. It had fueled his deceit. I listened, paralyzed, as he detailed his scheme, the intricate web of false invoices, doctored receipts, and inflated expenses. He laughed about how easily he manipulated me, how my trust was his greatest weapon. He even joked about my late husband Michael, saying Michael would have been proud of how David took care of me after his passing. That was the final shard of glass, piercing through the last vestiges of my naive belief in him. Michael, the love of my life, gone too soon. And David had preyed on my grief, on my vulnerability, using my sorrow as a shield for his avarice. The voice memo ended, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. But the echoes of his betrayal reverberated through every cell of my body. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with a cold, burning rage. The Evelyn who had clicked play on that recording was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. Someone who understood that the world was a far darker, more treacherous place than she had ever imagined. Someone who knew that justice wouldn't be handed to her, but would have to be seized. What would you do if the person you trusted most, the person who swore to protect you, was the very one destroying you from the inside out? What if your entire life, built on love and family, was nothing but a meticulously crafted illusion? I stood in my kitchen, the sun still shining, but my world had plunged into an abyss. My brother had mistaken me for a fool, a pawn in his greedy game. He was about to discover that he had awakened a force he never knew existed. A force that would stop at nothing to reclaim what was mine, and to ensure he paid for every single lie. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about legacy, about the memory of a love he had defiled. What happened next wasn't just a confrontation, it was a reckoning, a journey into the heart of darkness where I would either find my justice or lose myself completely. The game had just begun, and David had no idea the kind of player he was up against. You won't believe how this story unfolds. The twists and turns, the shocking truths that came to light, and the ultimate price that had to be paid. My name is Sarah, and my life, as I knew it, shattered into a million pieces the day I heard that voice memo. It was a Tuesday, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday, the kind where you expect nothing more exciting than a lukewarm cup of coffee and an overflowing inbox. I was in my small, cramped apartment in downtown Chicago, the city's ceaseless hum a familiar backdrop to my solitude. For weeks, a gnawing resentment had been festering deep within me, a bitter seed planted by a series of small betrayals, each one chipping away at my trust, but I never imagined the true depth of the rot. The phone buzzed, a notification from my brother, Michael. We weren't close, not anymore. Our relationship had been a slow, painful unraveling over the past few years. Ever since our parents passed, he'd become distant, cold, and increasingly focused on himself, leaving me to pick up the pieces of our fractured family. The message was a voice memo, just a few seconds long. I assumed it was a quick update about some mundane family affair, a bill, a distant relative's birthday, something easily dismissed. I pressed play, half listening, my mind already drifting to the mountain of work awaiting me. Then, his voice filled the room, not directed at me, but at someone else. His tone was laced with a chilling contempt, a sneering derision that made my blood run cold. He was talking about me, Sarah. Honestly, she's so pathetic. Still clinging to that dead-end job, living in that shoebox apartment, and the way she talks about Mom and Dad, like she was the only one who cared. She's such a burden, always has been. I swear, if it wasn't for the will, I'd cut her off completely. Each word was a dagger, twisting in a wound I hadn't even realized was there. The resentment I'd felt before, a dull ache, suddenly ignited into a raging inferno. It wasn't just disappointment, it was pure, unadulterated hatred. The world outside my window, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to mock me with its indifference. The skyscrapers, once symbols of aspiration, now felt like cold, unfeeling giants, towering over my sudden insignificance. My apartment, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like a cage, trapping me with the echo of Michael's cruel words. The central conflict of my life, which had been a simmering undercurrent, now erupted into a full-blown war. Michael, my own brother, saw me as nothing more than a pathetic obstacle, a means to an end. Voice memo wasn't just a mistake, it was a confession, a brutal unveiling of his true feelings. I played it again and again, each listen intensifying the shock, the anger, the profound sense of betrayal. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from a burgeoning rage. This wasn't the Michael I remembered, the boy I'd shared scraped knees and whispered secrets with. This was a stranger, a venomous imposter wearing my brother's face. The emotional stakes, which had been a slow burn now, rocketed to an unbearable height. My entire perception of our shared past, our family, my place in the world, crumbled around me. A single tear tracked a path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of pure, incandescent fury. How could he? How could he speak of me, his sister, with such disdain? The will he mentioned, the inheritance from our parents, suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. Was that all I was to him? A financial inconvenience? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. My normal world, the one where I believed Michael, despite his flaws, still cared for me on some fundamental level, had been irrevocably shattered. I stood there, the city lights beginning to twinkle outside, casting long shadows across my small living room. The resentment had deepened into a burning need for something, anything, to counteract the pain. This wasn't just about Michael's words. It was about every slight, every dismissive glance, every broken promise that had led to this moment. The voice memo wasn't the beginning of the conflict, but it was the catalyst, the spark that ignited the powder keg of my accumulated grievances. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I couldn't let this stand. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war. And Sarah, the quiet, unassuming sister, was about to become something entirely different. The story of my life, once a quiet drama, had just been rewritten as a revenge thriller. The city outside blurred into an irrelevant backdrop as a cold, calculated fury settled over me. It wasn't just anger, it was something far deeper, a primal instinct to protect what was mine, to reclaim what had been stolen. Michael's words had stripped away the last vestiges of my naive hope for reconciliation, revealing the true monster beneath his polished facade. I replayed the memo countless times, each listen a fresh stab, but also a hardening of my resolve. His sneering voice, the casual cruelty, the utter disregard for my existence, it fueled a fire I hadn't known I possessed. I spent the next few days in a haze, the world feeling distant and muffled. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid replays of Michael's contemptuous voice. Food tasted like ash. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, echoing with his betrayal. I knew I couldn't confront him directly, not yet. My emotional state was too volatile, and Michael, for all his flaws, was cunning. He would twist my pain, use it against me, just as he always had. This couldn't be a spontaneous outburst. It had to be precise, surgical, and utterly devastating. My mind, usually prone to overthinking, became a sharp, efficient instrument. I began to piece together the fragments of our shared history, searching for weaknesses, for leverage. Michael had always been obsessed with appearances, with projecting an image of success and stability, especially after our parents' deaths. He'd inherited the bulk of their estate, a fact he lorded over me with thinly veiled disdain, often reminding me of my comparatively modest inheritance. The will. That was his Achilles heel. He'd mentioned it in the memo, the only reason he hadn't cut me off completely. It was clear he feared anything that could jeopardize his claim, his carefully constructed empire of inherited wealth. I remembered hushed conversations between our parents, snippets about a clause, a condition in the will that Michael always seemed to skirt around. They had been private people, rarely discussing finances openly, but I distinctly recalled Mom once saying something about moral obligation and shared responsibility. At the time, it had meant little to me, a child's understanding of adult matters. Now it felt like a lifeline. I needed to find that will, to scrutinize every line, every legal loophole. My first step was a trip to the dusty archives of the county courthouse. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten stories. Navigating the labyrinthine system of public records was a tedious, soul-crushing task. Hours bled into days as I sifted through microfiche and faded documents, my eyes burning, my resolve wavering only slightly. Each official I encountered seemed to regard me with a mixture of suspicion and indifference, another faceless seeker in a sea of bureaucracy. Yet the image of Michael's smug face, the echo of his dismissive words, kept me going. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I found it, the original will, filed years ago. My hands trembled as I carefully unrolled the brittle parchment. The legalese was dense, but one section immediately caught my eye, a paragraph meticulously underlined in red ink. It wasn't a standard clause. It was a testament to our parents' enduring belief in family unity and mutual support. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that should either beneficiary, Michael or I, be found to have actively and maliciously undermined the other's well-being, reputation, or financial stability, their portion of the inheritance would be significantly reduced and reallocated to the other. There was a specific provision for demonstrable evidence of malicious intent. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was the weapon I needed. The voice memo wasn't just hurtful, it was proof. It was Michael, in his own words, expressing malicious intent, confirming his desire to cut me off completely. The irony was almost poetic. His casual cruelty, intended to denigrate me, now held the power to dismantle his carefully constructed life. A cold, exhilarating thrill shot through me. The resentment had deepened into a burning obsession, and now, a path to justice, or at least retribution, lay before me. I photocopied the relevant sections, my hands still shaking, but now with a different kind of energy. This wasn't about money for me. It was about exposing Michael for who he truly was, about stripping away his pretense and forcing him to face the consequences of his actions. He had always believed himself untouchable, protected by his charm and his inherited wealth. I would prove him wrong. I walked out of that courthouse into the harsh afternoon light, no longer just Sarah, the quietly suffering sister. I was an avenging force, armed with a truth Michael never thought I'd uncover. The game had changed, and he didn't even know he was playing. The fire Michael had ignited within me refused to be extinguished. It burned with a cold, steady intensity, fueling every waking thought, every quiet moment. I found myself replaying his contemptuous words, not to wallow in the pain, but to sharpen my resolve. He had underestimated me, dismissed me as pathetic, and that was his gravest mistake. The legal battle over our parents' estate, which had seemed like a distant, inevitable skirmish, now became my primary focus, a battleground where I could finally confront his arrogance. I dove into the intricacies of wills, trusts, and probate law, areas I'd previously avoided, leaving Michael to handle everything. He had always presented himself as the responsible one, the savvy businessman, while I was the artist, the dreamer. That facade began to crack as I unearthed discrepancies, subtle manipulations in the paperwork he'd so confidently presented. Each late night spent poring over documents, each phone call to a weary estate lawyer, felt like a small victory, a chipping away at the fortress of lies Michael had built around himself. He had been so careful, or so he thought, but he hadn't accounted for a sister scorned, a sister who now saw him not as a brother, but as an adversary. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Brenda, initially saw me as another grieving sibling caught in a family squabble. However, as I presented her, with my meticulous notes, the highlighted clauses, the dates that didn't quite align, her skepticism morphed into a focused determination. She saw the pattern, the calculated avarice beneath Michael's polished exterior. "He's been systematically devaluing your share," she'd stated, her voice tight with professional indignation, using loopholes you'd never even consider. "This isn't just greed, Sarah. This is a planned long-term strategy." Her words confirmed my deepest fears, yet also solidified my purpose. This wasn't just about money, it was about exposing the true nature of the man who had worn the mask of my brother for so long. One afternoon, a particularly damning piece of evidence surfaced. It was an old email exchange between Michael and a financial advisor, dating back to just months after our parents' passing. In it, Michael explicitly discussed strategies to minimize my inheritance, framing it as protecting the family assets from my irresponsible tendencies. He even mentioned my dead-end job and shoebox apartment, echoing the very words from the voice memo. The email wasn't just proof of his intent, it was a cruel, calculated blueprint of his betrayal, laid bare for me to see. My hands trembled as I read it, not from fear, but from a surge of cold fury. He hadn't just been careless, he had been deliberate, methodical, and utterly heartless. Armed with this new evidence, Brenda and I strategized. We decided to approach Michael not with an accusation, but with an offer. A carefully constructed settlement that, on the surface, seemed amicable. The goal wasn't to immediately expose him, but to lull him into a false sense of security, to make him believe I was still the naive sister he could easily manipulate. We knew he would counter, attempting to twist the terms further in his favor, revealing more of his hand in the process. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, but I felt an exhilarating rush, a sense of control I hadn't known in years. I remember the day Brenda sent the initial settlement proposal to Michael. My phone felt heavy in my hand, anticipating his reaction. When his reply finally came, it was exactly as we predicted, dismissive, condescending, and laced with thinly veiled threats about dragging things out in court. He even included a sarcastic remark about my sudden interest in finances. His arrogance was boundless, his belief in his own invincibility unwavering. He thought he was playing chess, but he was merely moving pawns while I was orchestrating a much larger game. His reply, far from discouraging me, only strengthened my resolve. Each dismissive word was another drop of fuel on the fire. The next step was crucial. We needed to gather more concrete evidence of his financial maneuvering, not just intent. This meant delving deeper into the labyrinth of shell corporations and offshore accounts Michael had so cleverly established. It was a world I knew nothing about, a shadowy realm where money disappeared and reappeared with dizzying complexity. Brenda warned me it would be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. Yet, I saw no other path. The thought of letting Michael get away with his deceit, of allowing him to continue believing he was above consequence, was unbearable. He had taken so much from me. My trust, my peace of mind, the last vestiges of our family. Now I would take back what was mine. And more. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice, about reclaiming my narrative and showing him the true cost of his betrayal. The game was escalating, and Michael, oblivious in his ivory tower, was about to learn that some burdens, once cast aside, return with a vengeance. The legal battle began, a slow, grinding machine designed to crush the spirit. I had meticulously gathered every scrap of evidence, every email, every text message, every casual remark Michael had ever made that hinted at his true intentions. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Brenda, looked at my stacks of documents with a grim satisfaction. She understood. She saw not just a case, but a profound injustice. Michael, on the other hand, treated it like an annoying inconvenience, another petty squabble he could easily win with his charm and his money. He genuinely believed I was bluffing, that I would eventually back down, just as I always had. His initial reaction to the lawsuit was a dismissive laugh, a voicemail left on my phone filled with derision. He called me delusional, pathetic, and accused me of trying to extort him. That voicemail, another piece of his callous disregard, only fueled my resolve. It became another exhibit in our growing file, another nail in his carefully constructed facade. He didn't understand that this wasn't about money for me anymore, not entirely. This was about principle, about finally standing up for myself against years of his emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. It was about dismantling the narrative he had so expertly woven, the one where I was the weak, dependent sister, and he was the benevolent protector. The first court appearance was a blur of legal jargon and hushed whispers. Michael arrived in a tailored suit, radiating an air of untouchable arrogance. He barely glanced at me, his eyes fixed on his own legal team, a phalanx of expensive lawyers who exuded an intimidating confidence. I, in contrast, felt a tremor in my hands, a cold knot in my stomach. This was real. This was happening. But when Brenda leaned over and whispered, "He's underestimating you, Sarah. That's his biggest mistake," a surge of strength coursed through me. I met Michael's fleeting gaze, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I held it, a silent promise of the storm to come. The discovery phase was brutal. Michael's lawyers tried every trick in the book to discredit me, to paint me as unstable, as greedy. They dug into my past, highlighting every perceived weakness, every moment of vulnerability. They brought up my struggles after our parents' death, twisting my grief into a narrative of instability. But I was ready. I had anticipated their tactics. I had spent countless nights preparing, steeling myself against their attacks. Each accusation they hurled, each insinuation they made. only strengthened my resolve. They were trying to break me, but they were only forging me into something harder, something unbreakable. One particularly grueling deposition lasted an entire day. Michael was there, sitting across from me, his face a mask of feigned indifference. His lawyer, a slick, condescending man, grilled me for hours, trying to trip me up, to catch me in a contradiction. He brought up the voice memo, trying to dismiss it as a momentary lapse, a private conversation taken out of context. But I held my ground. I calmly recounted the years of neglect, the broken promises, the financial abuses, all culminating in that damning recording. I watched Michael's composure crack, just for a second, a flicker of unease in his eyes. It was a small victory, but it tasted sweet. The turning point came when Brenda uncovered a series of shell corporations Michael had set up, funneling funds from our parents' estate, funds that should have been shared equally. He had been systematically siphoning money for years, hiding it behind layers of complex financial maneuvers. This wasn't just a matter of inheritance, it was outright fraud. The revelation hit Michael like a freight train. His carefully constructed world of impunity began to crumble. The smug confidence he had worn like a second skin started to fray at the edges. I remember the look on his face when Brenda presented the evidence in court. It was a mixture of shock and disbelief, quickly followed by a flash of raw, unadulterated fear. He had been so sure of himself, so convinced that his machinations were impenetrable. He had underestimated my persistence, my pain, and my unwavering determination to expose his deceit. The game was no longer escalating, it was nearing its terrifying climax. Michael, in his self-made ivory tower, was finally beginning to understand that some burdens, once cast aside, return with a vengeance, and this vengeance was about to cost him everything. The air in the courtroom crackled with anticipation, everyone sensing the seismic shift, the impending collapse of Michael's carefully curated world. This was it. The moment I had been fighting for, the moment of reckoning, was finally within reach. The judge's gavel struck, a sharp, decisive sound that echoed through the hushed courtroom, a final punctuation mark on Michael's unraveling. Given the overwhelming evidence presented, the court finds Michael Thompson liable for fraudulent misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. The words hung in the air, a death knell for the empire he'd so meticulously and cruelly built. My breath hitched, a strange mix of triumph and an unexpected pang of emptiness filling my chest. This wasn't just a victory, it was an annihilation. His face, usually so composed, so arrogantly self-assured, crumbled. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him a ghastly white. He looked at me then, his eyes wide with a dawning horror, a flicker of something akin to fear, and perhaps, just perhaps, a sliver of understanding. The casual contempt I'd heard in that voice memo, the dismissive cruelty, had finally come full circle. He was no longer the untouchable older brother, the one who'd scoffed at my struggles and reveled in his own perceived superiority. He was just Michael, a man stripped bare, exposed for the fraud he was. The financial repercussions were devastating. The judge ordered a complete forfeiture of all assets acquired through the manipulation of our parents' estate, along with substantial punitive damages. Every penny he had siphoned, every investment he had made with stolen funds, was now gone. The luxury condo, the sports car, the lavish lifestyle he'd flaunted, all of it was to be liquidated. It was a complete dismantling of his world, a meticulous undoing of every single wrong he had inflicted. The legal team had been relentless, meticulously tracing every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every deceitful maneuver. They had built an unassailable case, each piece of evidence a brick in the wall that now imprisoned Michael. As the courtroom began to empty, a few curious onlookers lingered, their gazes a mixture of pity and morbid fascination directed at Michael. He remained rooted to his spot, a statue of defeat, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the polished oak of the judge's bench. I watched him, searching for a flicker of the brother I once knew, the one who used to protect me from bullies on the playground, the one who taught me how to ride a bike. But that Michael was long gone, replaced by this bitter stranger, consumed by greed and self-interest. The transformation was complete. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn, placed a hand on my arm. "It's over, Sarah. You did it." Her voice was gentle, but her grip was firm, grounding me in the reality of the moment. I nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. It was over. The obsession that had consumed me for months, the relentless pursuit of justice, had finally reached its conclusion. The weight I hadn't realized I was carrying, the constant hum of anger and resentment, began to lift, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion. I walked past Michael, our eyes meeting for a fleeting second. There was no anger left in me, no desire to gloat, just a profound sadness for what we had lost, for the family that had been irrevocably broken. He said nothing, his mouth a thin, grim line. The silence between us was deafening, filled with years of unspoken grievances, of broken trust and shattered expectations. This wasn't the explosive confrontation I had envisioned in my darkest fantasies of revenge. It was something far more chilling, the quiet, devastating realization that there was nothing left to say. Later that week, I received a certified letter from Michael's lawyers. It was a formal acknowledgement of the court's ruling, detailing the transfer of assets and the schedule for restitution. Buried within the legalese, almost an afterthought, was a short, handwritten note from Michael himself. His familiar, hurried scrawl, the same one that used to leave me notes on the fridge as a child, was now filled with a strange, almost illegible tremor. "Sarah," it began, "I messed up. I know it's too late, but I'm sorry for everything." I reread the words, my fingers tracing the faded ink. "I'm sorry." It was a hollow apology, stripped of context, devoid of real emotion, yet it was the closest thing to an admission of guilt I would ever receive from him. It wasn't the heartfelt plea for forgiveness I might have once craved, but it was an acknowledgement, a small crack in the impenetrable facade he had built. The words didn't absolve him, nor did they erase the pain he had caused, but they offered a sliver of something unexpected, closure. The apartment still felt small, but the oppressive weight that had once filled it was gone. The city's hum outside no longer mocked me, it was just noise, part of the backdrop of a life I was slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding. The resentment had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. I had fought for what was right, and I had won. But the victory felt bittersweet, a testament to the fact that some wounds, even when healed, leave indelible scars. This wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming my narrative, about proving to myself, and to Michael, that I was not pathetic, not a burden. I was Sarah, and I was finally free. The final gavel strike echoed, sharp and definitive, through the courtroom. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the room, though for me, it felt more like the silent shattering of a years-long burden. Michael, my brother, stood across the aisle, his face a mask of disbelief, slowly crumbling into something akin to horror. His lawyer, a man whose expensive suit now seemed to sag under the weight of their defeat, whispered furiously in his ear. But Michael wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on me, wide and accusing, filled with a venom I recognized all too well. It was the same look he'd given me countless times growing up, whenever I dared to challenge his authority, whenever I refused to simply fall in line. A strange calm settled over me. The raging inferno that had consumed me for months had finally receded, leaving behind a quiet, smoldering ember. There was no triumphant roar, no fist-pumping victory dance. Just a profound sense of equilibrium, a feeling that the scales had finally, irrevocably, balanced. The judge's words, a clear and concise summary of the ruling, affirmed what I had known in my heart all along: justice, though delayed, was not denied. The assets, the inheritance that Michael had so greedily tried to seize, were to be divided equitably, as our parents had intended. My parents, who had loved us both, despite Michael's constant efforts to paint me as the lesser child, the burden. As I walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight felt different, warmer, less harsh. The city's hum, once a mocking backdrop to my solitude, now sounded like a symphony of possibility. Michael eventually emerged, flanked by his now silent lawyer, his shoulders slumped. He caught my eye again, and this time, the venom had curdled into something else, a raw, exposed vulnerability. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little boy who had once looked up to me, the brother who had shared secrets and dreams. But that image quickly faded, replaced by the man who had tried to erase me, to diminish my worth. He started to speak, his voice raspy, a desperate attempt to salvage something, anything. "Sarah, wait, we can talk about this. This isn't what Mom and Dad would have wanted." The words, once capable of twisting my gut, now felt hollow, devoid of any real power. I simply shook my head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. The time for talking, for pleading, for trying to mend what was irrevocably broken, had passed. The voice memo had been the final straw, the undeniable proof of his true feelings, the moment I realized that some relationships, no matter how deeply rooted, could not be saved. I didn't owe him an explanation, or a second chance, or even a moment of my time. My silence was my answer, a boundary drawn with unwavering conviction. He watched me, his expression shifting from desperation to a dawning comprehension of the chasm that now lay between us. It was a chasm he had dug himself, one word, one betrayal, one sneering remark at a time. The knowledge that he finally understood the permanence of his actions, the irreversible damage he had inflicted, was a form of closure I hadn't anticipated. Months later, I found myself standing in front of a small storefront, a lease agreement clutched in my hand. The inheritance, now rightfully mine, had provided not just financial security, but the freedom to pursue a dream I had long deferred. It wasn't a grand, audacious plan, but a quiet, steady ambition to build something of my own, something that reflected my values, my resilience. The shop was small, a little dusty, but filled with potential. It would be a bookstore, a place where stories could be shared, where imagination could flourish. A stark contrast to the sterile, transactional world Michael had tried to trap me in. As I unlocked the door, the scent of old paper and new beginnings filled the air. There was no lingering bitterness, no burning desire for further retribution. The resentment had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. I had fought for what was right, and I had won. But the victory felt bittersweet, a testament to the fact that some wounds, even when healed, leave indelible scars. This wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my narrative, about proving to myself, and to Michael, that I was not pathetic, not a burden. I was Sarah, and I was finally free. My brother's betrayal had been a crucible, forging me into someone stronger, someone who understood the profound importance of self-worth. I had learned that true freedom wasn't just about financial independence, but about the liberation from the toxic narratives others tried to impose upon you. The journey had been arduous, marked by pain and anger, but ultimately it had led me here to a place of peace, purpose, and profound self-acceptance. The silence between Michael and me was no longer a void, but a space I had filled with my own voice, my own choices, and my own unwritten story. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker, every eye on me, every breath held tight. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. For months, I had been consumed by the betrayal, by the raw wound my brother's words had carved into me. The voice memo, that accidental confession, had been a poison seeping into every corner of my life. I had sought justice, a reckoning for the years of manipulation and deceit, and now, finally, I stood at the precipice. My lawyer, Ms. Albright, a woman whose sharp intellect was matched only by her unwavering resolve, gave me a reassuring nod. Across the aisle, Daniel sat slumped, his face pale and drawn. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a hollow fear. Seeing him like that, stripped of his bravado, a strange mix of triumph and sorrow washed over me. This wasn't the Daniel I knew, the one who had always seemed to glide through life effortlessly, leaving a trail of broken promises in his wake. This was a man facing the consequences of his actions, and the weight of that reality was crushing him. The judge's voice cut through the tension, clear and deliberate. He recounted the evidence, the financial irregularities, the forged documents, the damning voice memo. Each word was a nail in the coffin of Daniel's carefully constructed lies. I remembered the sleepless nights, poring over bank statements, cross-referencing dates, the sickening realization that my own brother had systematically siphoned off my inheritance, the legacy our parents had left us. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the profound violation of trust, the deliberate cruelty of his deception. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, a collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Daniel flinched, his head dropping into his hands. I felt no surge of elation, no triumphant cheer. Instead, a profound emptiness settled over me. This victory, hard-won and undeniably just, felt heavy, tinged with a bitterness I hadn't anticipated. The years of resentment, the burning desire for vindication, had finally culminated in this moment, yet the closure I had craved remained elusive. During the sentencing, the judge spoke of the severity of the crime, the breach of familial trust, the financial and emotional toll it had taken. He handed down a significant prison sentence, one that would give Daniel ample time to reflect on his choices. As the bailiffs led Daniel away, his eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was no defiance, no anger, just a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher, perhaps regret, perhaps resignation. Leaving the courthouse, the crisp autumn air felt different. The burden I had carried for so long, the weight of Daniel's betrayal had lifted, but it left a void. The obsession with justice had consumed me, narrowed my world to a single burning point. Now, with that battle won, I had to figure out who I was without the fight. Months turned into a year. I reopened the small antique shop my parents had owned, the one Daniel had tried to sell off. I poured my energy into restoring it, polishing old silver, repairing delicate porcelain. Each piece held a memory, a whisper of a time before the bitterness. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional love of forgotten creatures. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the correctional facility. It was from Daniel. My hands trembled as I opened it. He wrote about his time inside, the stark reality of his situation, the endless hours of reflection. He apologized, truly apologized, for the first time. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only for understanding. He acknowledged the pain he had caused, the irreparable damage to our family. Reading his words, I realized that while I couldn't erase the past, I could choose how I carried it. The anger had dulled, replaced by a quiet sorrow for the brother I had lost and the one he could have been. The closure wasn't a sudden burst of joy, but a slow, steady unfolding, a gradual acceptance that some wounds, even when healed, leave scars. I had fought for justice, and I had found it, but the true victory was reclaiming my own peace, rebuilding my life not on resentment, but on resilience, and the quiet hope for a future free from the shadow of betrayal.